Some arguments last a day, some last a year. But what about an argument that lasts for 500 years? We're talking about a conflict that literally split the Western world, redrew the map of Europe, and shaped the world we live in today.
So that's the million-dollar question, right? How do you possibly fix a divide that deep, that old, that's baked into the very culture of civilizations? I mean, it sounds completely impossible. But what if I told you it happened? And not in some distant ancient past, but really, really recently.
Yup, 1999. Get this. On the very last day of October of that year, something incredible happened. After half a millennium of, well, not seeing eye to eye, two of the main players in this debate finally came together. But how on earth did they pull it off? Well, they found what you could call a translation key. It was this amazing insight that let both sides finally hear what the other had been trying to say for centuries. And they realized, wait a minute, maybe we're not as far apart as we thought. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the argument itself. Then we'll dive into the massive misunderstanding at the heart of it all. We'll trace the slow thaw that took centuries, uncover that amazing translation key, and then finally see where we are now. So our story really centers on this landmark document. It's got a mouthful of a name, the Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification, or JDJ for short. The easiest way to think about it is like a peace treaty, signed between the Catholic Church and the Lutheran World Federation, basically settling the exact issue that kicked off the Protestant Reformation 5 centuries ago. But here's what's so cool about it. This wasn't about one side admitting they were wrong and the other was right. The whole point was to establish what they called a consensus in basic truths. The goal wasn't to erase all the differences and make everyone identical, but to agree on the absolute foundational stuff, even if they'd still used different language for the details. Now, to really get why this peace treaty is such a big deal, you have to understand the war. So let's rewind the clock 500 years, because it turns out the core of the problem wasn't just a simple disagreement. It was that both sides were completely, fundamentally talking past each other. Okay, check this out, because this is where it gets really interesting. When the Protestant reformers, guys like Martin Luther, started talking about being saved by faith alone, what they meant was that our relationship with God is a totally free gift. It's based on trusting God's promise, not on how good of a person you are. But that's not what Catholic leaders at the time heard. They heard, oh, so good works are optional now? Sacraments don't matter? You can just do whatever you want? And it was a two-way street. The Council of Trent, which was the Catholic response, was actually crystal clear that salvation is a gift of God's grace, not something you earn. They taught that this grace actually changes you from the inside out. But what did the reformers hear? They heard faith plus works, a system where you had to earn your way to heaven with a checklist of good deeds. You see? Both sides were trying to protect the idea of God's grace, but they were using different words and just hearing the absolute worst in what the other was saying. So you might be asking, how on earth do you go from that level of mutual condemnation to, well, consensus? It's a great question, and the answer is it didn't happen overnight. The 1999 agreement was really the finish line of a very, very long and slow marathon. And I mean really slow. After Trent basically locked in the Catholic position back in the 1500s, you start to see little cracks of light. You get figures like John Wesley in the 1700s, who, without even realizing it, started bridging the gap by talking about both faith and holiness. But the real game changer was Vatican II in the 1960s. That's when the Catholic Church really opened its doors to dialogue with other Christians. It totally changed the climate, and for the first time in centuries, made an agreement like the JDJJ even seem possible. And that brings us to the big aha moment, the discovery of that translation key we talked about. This is the simple, elegant idea that finally cracked the code on this 500-year-old argument. So here it is. It all came down to one crucial distinction: the difference between the basis of our salvation and the necessary fruit of our salvation. Think of it like cause and effect. Once both sides could see that difference, everything changed. The best way to picture it is with a tree. The basis of salvation, those are the roots. That's God's free gift received by faith. It's the one and only foundation. Both sides could totally agree on that. And the fruit, well, those are the apples, the good works, the life of love that necessarily grows out of those healthy roots. This meant Lutherans could keep stressing the roots, that we're saved by grace alone, while Catholics could keep stressing the fruit, that true grace always changes us. The breakthrough was agreeing the apples don't create the roots. And the result of this is just wow. The Declaration itself says that all those nasty condemnations from the 16th century, the ones where each side called the other heretics, they no longer apply. It doesn't undo the past, but it says, hey, what we were condemning back then was a misunderstanding, and it doesn't describe what you actually teach today. That is huge. So what's the legacy of all this? Where are we today? Is the 500-year-old division just gone? Well, as you can probably guess, it's a little more complicated than that. It's really important to remember that phrase, consensus and basic truths. This wasn't about erasing differences. It was about affirming a shared central belief in the gospel, while still leaving room for different traditions, theologies, and ways of talking about it. And yeah, as you can see, there are still some pretty big theological questions they don't see totally eye to eye on. But here's the massive shift. Thanks to this agreement, these are no longer considered church-dividing issues. They're just seen as different ways of exploring the same fundamental truth. The family can disagree, but they're still family. And really, that's the thought I want to leave you with. This whole story is this incredible testament to what's possible. It shows that even the oldest, most bitter, most entrenched conflicts can be healed when people are willing to listen and to search for that translation key. It just makes you wonder, if a 500-year-old argument can be bridged, what other problems that we all think are completely unsolvable today really aren't?